It's solving a driver problem, where we bring guests who have proven strategies that just plain work to fill your empty seats, defend bogus lawsuits, and bring them home safely. Today, I have Ron Yazzetti of Work4, who's been a part of ours for quite some time and is really focused on filling empty seats in a different way. And as we know, it starts with lead generation. You need to have somebody to talk to work and woo and convince and show what a great place you are to work. And that's why we partner with Work4. Ron, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Scott. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. Well, the reason you're here is, as you shared with us, Work4 recently did a survey, asking drivers who you guys work on in terms of recruiting and marketing too. And we love the voice of the driver, and anybody that can bring a synopsis of the voice of the driver is someone we respect and want to have on the show here. So that's the center of today's conversation. What are some lessons we're hearing out there in that survey that can impact how people approach driver marketing, driver recruiting? So maybe let's just start with a summary of the survey, Ron. What were some key takeaways for you?
So this was a survey that we did a little earlier in the year that was very powerful. I think we're going to wind up doing this annually, but this is a survey proposed to over 10,000 drivers in our database. And the biggest things that I gained away, or anytime that you can get data that can impact decisions that you make and how you do business for recruiting and how you advertise, I think is really important. Some of the big takeaways that I felt were important, or that I took away personally, were really some of the benefits, some of the things that benefit to motivate drivers. It isn't, a lot of times we think monetary bonuses, compensation, and don't get me wrong, compensation is important, but to me, sometimes it's those intangible benefits that sometimes are overlooked. Home time, work-life balance, and things like that. The other thing that I found was very interesting and this was noted in some of the comments in this survey, which we're more than happy to share it to your listeners after our call. But it involved the driver's desire for carriers just to listen to what they're saying. So just having active listening, what drivers, how they feel, have an understanding and empathy for what they're doing as a driver, where they're driving, how much they're driving. And any carrier could do that. That's not like a secret sauce. It's not like you have to have unlimited funds or be able to offer something extravagant to be able to do that. That's just human decency. So those are some big takeaways that I saw from the survey.
I know it really isn't rocket science. But I want to talk about those couple points though about, we try to help our clients get out of just talking about money, cents per mile, because yes, that there's enough that you got to talk about, but life is more than that. And what we try to do is help people tell their story, because when it's drivers telling their story, it's more believable than any tagline that you and I can come up with, anyone that we come up with in the boardroom. And let the voice of the driver be that marketing engine is a way that we promote that. But an interesting point about the basics on those check-ins. All I'll say to the audience, that I think we've had people come on and talk about this before, clients specifically, that do the basics, that put in check-ins across, not just from dispatch, but if they are from dispatch, they have nothing to do about the load that day, right? Just how we doing. From recruiting, sure. 60 days later, hey, we talked about this, so you still living up to what we talked about. From the CEO, thank you for joining the family. We love having you here. Those regimented processes work. We've seen them work day in and day out.
Absolutely.
Especially for our folks on the road. Well, so let's keep poking at that. Were there any other key components or things that you want to elaborate on that you thought, particularly from those comments? Because that's where a lot of this juicy stuff, lies. What were some other things you took away?
I mean, the biggest thing for us, obviously we want to get a pulse of the driver market. That was key. But above and beyond that, naturally, we are in the advertising space. So I looked at a lot of the answers, the responses from the form of, how can they help you as an employer to speak better to your potential marketplace? And so we think of things about ad copy, try to educate carriers even beyond the ad copy, right? So recruitment is not just putting the ad in front of them. It's the whole process of onboarding them, bringing through the recruitment process, eventually making the placement, and even well beyond that, as far as the future success of that driver. So just making sure that the driver is satisfied will help to reduce long-term turnover. So thinking about these things not only impact the front of the or top end of the funnel, but also the bottom part too. I believe that using it in that process, being able to things like when's the best time to contact carriers, or sorry, not carriers, but candidates. What's the best channel to reach them? These are some things beyond just content. So although the biggest lens I wanted to look at it through was like what kind of copy could be effective for recruitment, but
Right.
alongside of that, during looking at the funnel itself and saying what parts of the funnel can we help improve and find the best practices for, and ultimately with the main result or goal of improving conversions, which obviously what everybody wants.
Well, yeah, I have a statement that make, but I want to keep poking at that scad because you teased me with a couple things that you learned, but I'd like to hear the specifics. The one thing I'll say is this is a marketing focused conversation, but as marketers, we want something juicy that we can market and sell. We're selling jobs, right? And when the carriers do the basics, we mentioned those check-ins. A big flaw that we see is if nobody owns it, no one's name's next to the task, then it never gets done. It's in nobody's job description, nobody's bonus on it. That simple thing right there shifts it so that marketing has got something to publish. It's got stories to tell. And you can't put lipstick on a pig, right? So you have to have your fundamentals down. And so I guess this conversation is assuming that everyone out there listening's got their fundamentals down. Because if not, there's no reason to start bragging about it online. Tell me about, you said, let's get in the nitty gritty. Times to talk with drivers. What are the best times?
So we found that usually believe it or not, in the mornings and also email communication were some of the big highlights that we took away from that. And we thought that was quite interesting. I think we can elaborate a little bit more on that, but that to me was a little bit interesting. I think that by bottom line is people will tell you different times. The survey actually suggested that some had more preference towards mornings than others, but it wasn't necessarily that all of them said morning time. Sure. So the way I view that, and just I kind of related a lot to even sales prospecting, because frankly that's kind of the role that I'm in. But when I'm thinking about that, changing the frequency, not always doing it at the same time, I think is important. Yes, you might have a better success rate in the morning times, or maybe yours is in the evening. But by staggering the actual timeframes that you're using, I think is really important, because if you're doing the same way and the same time all the time, you might not see the best success. So I think a lot of things that don't go into the survey that I think you should also think about is what geography that you're focusing on. Your geography might be different than others. So I think just an important part is tracking what your results are, when your best times are, and in your driver's times are, asking your candidates even, or the client's candidates, when the best times are, so that way you get your own data that's best for you.
Yep. Yeah, a simple trick our recruiters use is, hey, when did that person fill out that form? It's probably a good time. Not like,
good time,
not always, but it's a good indicator. Let's start there at least, right? And by the way, if they're filling out that form, let's get to them. Analogy we make, Ron, over here is it's like ordering pizza. If you call Papa John's, they don't answer the phone. You're not going to wait for Papa John's to call you back. You're calling Domino's because you're hungry now, and that's the driver market.
That's right, absolutely. And if you don't respond to them right away, they're obviously off speaking. They're ordering their next meal somewhere else. In this case, finding a job somewhere else. So.
I can tell you something our marketing team found surprising was that emails were what drivers had selected in that. We email and text at the same time, because why not? Because we've designed our system to that way. So we want to call, text, email. We don't know what their preference is, but we're going to do them all and see which one that comes back, and then we're going to sit on that one. We see within our ATS, text is what is in the high 80s in terms of the normal communication. What do you think? Why do you think that is? What's that differentiate all about?
Yeah, so that was data that was a little surprising to me at first as well, because we're high on mobile. We were very early adapters to mobile technology for recruitment here at Work4. But with that being said, this data was candidate feedback, really candid data, a response from the client, from the candidate. And so keeping in mind there's two parts of it, right? There's the fact of the candidate saying, hey, yeah, sure, if you're going to ask me that question, this is the best way that you should reach out to me. And ironically, they did choose email first, then phone, and then text. But as we know, response wise, people have their mobile phones all the time. You get that text notification, your email might get buried. So, there's a little bit of grain of salt there. But, again, I thought it was very interesting that the candidate's response was that they would prefer to be reached out via email. And again, this was against a pool of over 10,000 users. So just something to consider. And I'll make the same comment that I did regarding frequency. Try different channels. I'm a big firm believer of this. I think the sales funnel and the recruitment funnel in my mind are very closely aligned. And I always instruct my reps to consider, not just trying to phone call, send an email, send a LinkedIn message. So trying different channels, who knows, each candidate receives information differently and they might have their own preference. Again, it's not like all candidates said that they would only like to be contacted via email. There was definitely a pretty good mix of other responses too. So by staggering not only the frequency, but the method of communication, I think is really important too.
Agreed. Yes, it's surprised me, but it's not going to stop us from sending email. It's free and it's the same amount of effort as a text. You've got template. Why not?
And there's automation. I think that's another thing to point out. Automation is key, and you can automate a lot of these things, whether it's text or email. So why not use those multiple touch points?
And you need to, otherwise you'll drown. So it's absolutely a requirement. Yeah, and make sure your system's doing that for you. Keeping that marketing lens on, something I see, Ron, is when we help clients out, many of them I'll say in our medium to smaller size client base, the recruiter or recruiters are the ones who are doing many of the ad postings or buys. And I wouldn't, they're better recruiters and they should be there, but they've got this other responsibility, which is generate their own leads. Tough job because it's really two different brains.
Sure.
Let's help them out a little bit. I know job titles are key in terms of generating, headlines, especially in social, when it's just so easy to scroll right past something. Do you have any guidance for our crew out there on picking the right job title?
So with ads that we run, we had traditionally done I came from the job board space myself. So when I think of advertising, I think there's a spectrum of content or method or platforms that you can consider. And in this case, obviously being targeted media or social media ads, your title is really a headline or a small short real estate. And usually, of course, our suggestion is to try to keep that very brief. And with that being said, it's more or less about the keywords that you're using, maybe a little bit above and beyond just the title. So with that said, I think having things well written is important. Obviously, compensation is what we found in the survey to be one of the number one benefits that you can make sure that you have. So clearly listing that if you have it. The other thing that we found is that having it in the right increment is really important too. One survey, one of the things that we found out was that having the pay listed as an annual amount, it could be the same exact compensation, but broken down annually, monthly, weekly. What we found is that most people prefer it to be listed as an annualized number. Next was weekly, next was monthly. And then, believe it or not, at a very low response rate was CPM, which I know you mentioned earlier. I keep seeing a lot of CPM ads written in ads, and it was the least responded ad copy. So having CPM just alone in there, 6% of the respondents said that they would respond to that, whereas with annualized, it was like closer to 30 in the mid 30s. So again, just if we know those things and that data suggests that, then naturally, if we kind of can control our copy based on that. And that's really what I kind of looked at the whole survey results from, was a lot of the questions were relative to some of the information that we would tend to stick in an ad. And I think it's really important to understand your audience and using this data to either stay away from content or information that users aren't going to respond to, or if we are going to make sure that we're putting stuff in there, making sure that we're putting it in the right way to ensure that we get the best success.
That's interesting. So, Ron, when I was a young lad, one of my first gigs for a trucking company went out to truck stops and shoulder tap drivers, and I had a sign
Okay.
for a company that said, "What would you prefer, 60 grand a year or 1,200 a week?" And I got a few laughs. Someone could do the math.
Yep.
It was roughly, it wasn't 10,000 drivers survey, but it was roughly 60% were on the weekly standpoint. So, but I think to your point, this is one where the marketer in me comes out and says A/B test it. You know, some people, you got the bigger number, trying to break down the brain science, right? So
Yeah.
60, that's bigger. I like bigger. Weekly's more tangible, and I can kind of get a sense of what do I, you know, what are my groceries and my spend every week. And a truck driver, you know, it's, and anybody can see like that far in the future where years afar. So knowing what I know about neuromarketing and brain science, there's a reason why both have appeal
Yeah.
to the person.
No, I agree. And keeping in mind some of the results, let's see, I can actually pull up the data real quick as we're speaking, but keeping in mind that some of the responses weren't that far off. You know, some of them might be 30% respondent, and the other one might be 20 something. So I look at those with a grain of salt. Yeah, weekly, believe it or not, was the second in line. So it was 36% for annualized, and it was 22% for weekly. So I don't feel like those are that far off. But you know, CPM came in at 6%. Having just sign-on bonus and no compensation was at 8%. So I think those are far enough as a variance where I think you'll find that yeah, I mean, if you want it, and we do A/B testing all the time too, by the way. So I definitely encourage that. And like you said, it's different based on market and other factors. But I think that, you know, there's definitely some interesting data that came alongside of that. And again, I don't think the weekly and from what we see, the weekly and annualized aren't that far off. So it wouldn't be surprised that, you know, one would be similar to the other based on circumstance.
No, thank you for bringing the detail. I just shared that story because it brought me back to my first days in the industry. And but I agree with you 1,000% on CPM every time I talk with drivers. Okay, well then the next question is, well, how many miles per
Miles.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have to
Yeah.
get out a calculator. Anytime you got to think, that's not good for anybody. Nobody wants to think, right? That's not disparaging on truck drivers. I don't want to think, you don't want to think. Don't make me do the math, please.
And for personally, for feedback I've gotten was, it's really what are some of the fine you know, fine detail line in the contract. So those are some things that I hear in the market area where CPM is kind of almost dirty in a way, because it's not as clear to the candidate. But
And I will say that so our philosophy that is, I'll say, backed up by drivers, is that sign-on bonuses are a cancer on the industry because it just encourages turnover. And the guys aren't dumb. The guys and gals out there that see it, that when they see those big $20,000 numbers, they know that, like, okay, so how long do I got to stick around to get that? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? They're not stupid, so they're not lured in by that anymore.
yeah, I agree.
Um,
And everybody's offering them too. So ultimately, it's kind of a, yeah, it's kind of fluff, I think, at this point.
it is, and now this is no longer a unique concept, but I did at least appreciate when I would see them call the transition bonus. Oh, they knew what it was. But there is a reality of, hey, if I'm going to be putting my 2 weeks, I got to get over to you. I'm going to orientation. Hey, I'm not making as much money in those week or two that I would had I not joined you. And I think that is a fair concept to consider.
I
That
agree.
is more tasteful than just a carrot for carrot's sake.
Sure.
We just going back to the, you know, you're doing a lot of social advertising, primarily Facebook. You know, something else I see out there is from jobs boards, and some of them are guilty of this crime, which is they'll just say, "Hey, Ron's Trucking, give me your pay, give me your home time. You got a picture of a truck? No problem. I'll just slap one in." And everybody's ad looks the same because they're following the same format: pay, home time, equipment. Maybe if they're getting crazy, they'll throw in another platitude of "I'll treat you with respect," done, and away you go. How critical are having images that stand out from the crowd in generating clicks out there?
There's definitely, we do a lot of A and B testing, by the way. So images are something we kind of are very in tune to. And, I see there's some, there's certainly things that Facebook likes, there's things that candidates like. So it's kind of a fine balance between the two different things. Historically, Facebook doesn't like images with a lot of text in them. In the past, they've kind of rejected images of those of that nature, and over time they have their own rating and score, some secret sauce or score that says, hey, if it has a certain amount of text, then we're gonna kind of put this one down on the relevance scale. So just being aware of some of those things I think are important. Above and beyond that, there are certain things that we see. What we tend to recommend are either, believe it or not, drivers with smiley, happy faces in the image is actually one of the things that we found to stand out. Either by a truck, near a truck, and if not, then after that we start to think of just the truck itself, or potentially a distribution center or a terminal. So those are kind of the progressions that we usually recommend. But I always like to say that it's really up to the candidate, and that can change and vary over time. What we see works today might not work well in the future. So that's where I think A and B testing is really important. I do think images are important, but I think it's, if you use the same things over and over and over again, they get redundant. So I think you got to kind of keep them relevant and fresh over time. Let the candidates kind of decide for you, right? That's why we do our A/B testing over time. And yeah, we can find over a lot of different campaigns which things work better than others. So that way, out of the gates, we can start with maybe the best images. But the A and B testing is I would say, really important, because then it takes the guesswork out of it. You're not necessarily reliant just on what your viewpoints are, the client's viewpoints. You're actually using data that's coming from the results of from what candidates are seeing.
Correct. It's not an opinion. It's there's data behind it, right? Hey, you might like that image, sir, but this one's working. Should we start here?
You know what's interesting about that? It's kind of something, I'm laughing because there was something that came up we started to do this a while ago, and we've actually stopped doing it, and now I'm thinking about maybe why we might kind of go back to it. But when we first started doing some of these ads, the clients would always say, oh, what images should we use? And I would have never thought this would have worked, but at the time, my head of marketing was like, you know what, whatever this position is, or location is, we're going to go ahead and put up, we're going to do A/B testing, but we're going to come up with, an image of a local attraction of that city. And so if it was Chicago, we would do the bean. If it was, Florida, we might do the beach or something. And so instead of actually even doing an image of the actual job, the position itself, we would do a kind of a destiny. If it was Orlando, we would do maybe an image of Disney or something like that. But anyways, those ads outperformed anything else. Images of people, here nor there. Again, I think the key is don't be afraid to try some new things, but also know what works, and that A and B testing can also help with that too.
Yeah, and just to back up your points of what's going on behind, in the brain again, is with the happy drivers you mentioned in the truck, the guy scrolling through Facebook. So there's a cat video, there's something that grandma posted or an aunt or whoever, and then there's a truck. And you have to interrupt them. Why would they not go like that? And the short story is your brain is going, trucks. I drive a truck. Like, now I'm paying attention, right? And it really is that simple, is what captured attention. To your point about the being in Chicago, I live in Chicago, right? Now I'm paying attention.
It resonates. Yep.
It's stopping you, because that is the first thing, is you got to interrupt. You got to stop them in their feeds, because it is so easy to flip on. And then you have them. Now you got to engage them and hook them and keep them running. Those are fun marketing classes that we can keep breaking down at another session. But we can bring it back to the survey. Something that stuck with us, that hurt our soul a little bit, but lines up with the industry, is that 52% of respondents are actively looking. So if I hear it right, for everybody listening, half of your drivers are actively looking right now. And another good chunk would say, yeah, they'll take the call, right? They'll listen to, they're passively looking. Did you see anything in the comments in there that tells us why that is, Ron?
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned this a little earlier regarding just being in tune with what the drivers are saying or how they're feeling. But I think the market has kind of created that effect, right? So we talked about the sign-on bonuses, and in some parts that's kind of drowning things out a little bit. But drivers know their worth now, and to me, it's all about the economies of supply and demand, right? So we know that the drivers are in high demand right now, so they have the leverage. And so there's this environment where drivers know what they're worth, and whether that's compensation or their work-life balance to be kind of aligned with what they're looking for. So these candidates are constantly looking for their next best role. So I think the thing to me from a carrier standpoint that they should be aware of is really where are they, are they in tune with their drivers? Two things that come to mind there. The first is surveys. So I think you said being in tune with, I think you kind of alluded to this twice in our conversation, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Having a pulse and sentiment of your audience and your workforce is really important. See what they're doing right, see what they're doing wrong. Those surveys allow, we just actually did a survey here internally, and it was very, very useful. I took some notes as a sales leader in that survey, and I wrote on my sheet of paper on my desk to praise good work. And something as simple as that, it doesn't cost me anything to reward somebody with praise. When they did something well. Obviously, letting them know when maybe they're doing things differently or could do differently is usually what we lead to. Hey, you should be doing this better, or why did you do that? But I think as humans, we sometimes forget to do that, and I think that's really important. The other thing is social media. So a lot of times carriers will look at social media as a bad thing, and so I personally look at it as an area of opportunity. Whether it's a post or an advertisement, a lot of drivers, current and past drivers, will comment on carrier social media content, and a lot of carriers get freaked out about that. They are a little bit reluctant to respond to those things, or they get a little antsy when they see stuff that's negative. And I personally pin that back to them and say, hey, this is an area for you to learn to see what you're. Sometimes we know that candidates are going to respond irrelevantly. But for the most part, I think if you can sift through that, you'll find there are certain data points or certain information that might be actionable, whether it's pay, whether it's the way candidates felt like they were treated or drivers were treated. So I look at that as all part of the, people are going to actively look. So to go back to your initial question, although it's hurtful to see that response rate of 52%, over half, sure, but what can we do about it? You can't stop people looking for jobs, so let's just assume they're going to do it. How can we ensure that candidates and drivers, for that matter, are happy with the work that they're doing? And again, it goes beyond compensation. So making sure that their work-life balance is right, making sure that they're praised appropriately. I think by thinking that way, you can kind of just assume that, yeah, you're going to see some turnover. I think every carrier has, but how do you limit that? How do you, even if they are actively looking, when it gets back to it, they can realize, what, we are treated well here at XYZ carrier.
Man, we're in a good way. We're having a marketing conversation, and we keep coming back to retention, which is good, because that really is it. And while that's really big sense, we're talking about the survey. I really feel like we should be busting out the series of courses for leadership development that we create, or bringing my buddy Tim Smith from Pivotal Retention on how he structures and assigns proactive check-ins, because those are the little things, to your point, that cost you time but solve all the problems. And I think that's really it is, you got to work on your engine. You got to get to pit row a little bit, take some time off, fill it up, new tires, work on the engine, so you get back out there, you'll be running faster. It's the best investment of it. And all it is a couple minutes.
It's not hard. It's not, it's just little things that you can control and don't cost a lot of money or resources to do. We actually, believe it or not, we do a lot of articles and content on our site, and we're recruitment marketing. We're mainly focusing on the top end of the funnel, but you'll be surprised that most of the engagement that we get on our posts and our content is relative to retention. And I can't tell you how much we think that they're linked together. I mean, if you have a great retention strategy, it will help bolster your recruitment efforts or make them more efficient. So I definitely agree with you.
No, and we did a presentation not too long ago where we were taking a look at some clients and some prospects. And imagine the ones with high turnover, imagine what their reviews look like on Indeed, on Facebook, on Google.
Yeah.
And the question is, if you're a recruiter and you've got that wall ahead of you, it's an impossible question, but the question is, how many people didn't apply because they saw their reputation? What have you bought online where you didn't look at reviews, or when you're in a new town and you're looking for a restaurant, when did you not check that out? I mean, reviews,
Yeah.
we know, take them with a grain of salt, but they definitely are influencing our decision making. Don't tell me that they're not. I know you're not. I know you don't say that. And so that's kind of the point of that is, if you have a poor reputation out there, get your good night on recruiting. You can't. You
Yeah.
got nothing. There's nothing to recruit for.
I mean, you might be able to offer them the most amount of pay, and they might take that on. But if you've got issues under the engine, then that's going to be seen through in a short period of time. And as we see with the data, compensation is important, but it's not everything. They're gonna want to look at some of those, how they're treated, and how what their worth is in the organization, as well. So an
Well,
extra $10,000 maybe isn't going to be make or break them if they're going to enjoy their job.
no, and that was a piece on there as well, that home time is a big part of that. And I don't know that we can solve that in the 2 minutes we have left, but that was interesting that someone would take more money to be home more often. I think the recruiters out there know that. I know when we recruit for local jobs versus over the road jobs, the cost per hire is just, it's like we're working in two different industries when you compare the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen the same. And that is more of a, you and I aren't going to fix that, Ron, because that's an operational decision that a company has to take into account. I mean, hey, do you want to change completely how you're dispatching and switch to A/B turns and become an LTL carrier? That isn't going to happen overnight. So I think that's more of a nugget for people to chew on, but not one for you and I to profess on.
No, it's not. But I will say is that a lot of companies, they understand that, but they don't think about that from a recruitment perspective, and what that really means. They get upset sometimes because they have to spend more money or they have more turnover because of those roles. I think understanding who you are in the market, and what you're looking for, and I know that's sometimes easier said than done, because the person handling that recruitment is the one catching the heat for all this, when upper leadership should recognize that. But I think it's an important note to recruiters to make sure that upper leadership is aware of it, and what the repercussions are. Obviously, making sure that leadership knows that cost per hire is going to be higher, and really understanding what that is. I think communication and having that data is important, so that way they first of all can protect their jobs, but more importantly, maybe ask for more budget if they recognize that they're if they have the data in front of them. It will only make them more empowered to be able to educate their leadership, and make sure they can make the right decisions or get the support that they need, understanding, educating them that they know that that's the right way to go.
Well, we're in overtime, Ron, but I wanted to ask this last question because we're talking about what's important in the core of the business, and I dig it, and I didn't expect to go there, but I'm glad we did. But I have one nerd question for you, and that is, as someone who's marketing on Facebook, the privacy laws are getting tighter and tighter, and what you can do to sell shoes online, you've got 600 data vectors, but if you're recruiting, what is it, down to the 10, 12? It's not a lot, right? So how are these privacy laws changing what we can do in terms of targeting and finding drivers on social, and how to get around that?
So yeah, there's no question that Apple's policies have become a lot stricter, and are impacting, of course, not just Facebook advertising, which is what we're talking about here, but other forms of advertising, and not just recruitment, but naturally also consumer marketing as well. With that being said, I think it really helps. It really hurts the general recruitment population, because it has made it really strict on being able to run recruitment ads, and I've seen a lot of employers who have started to shy away from that, because they can't target and advertise to specific segments the same way they used to, which is definitely unfortunate. However, thankfully at Work4, we've been we haven't been impacted by that as much, because over the last 12 years, we've built a lot of audiences, especially specific to CDL drivers. So because of those strong audiences, we're able to get in, do retargeting ads, do lookalike targeting ads, and really circumvent a lot of the recruitment restrictions that a lot of employers face. And so for us, it's actually been very useful. And frankly, we don't really see the same impact that a lot of employers are because of that. And that's just kind of the way it is. But I think audiences are a way to go, and we've had the luck of running thousands of ad campaigns and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for recruitment marketing towards CDL drivers. So have a pretty extensive database of drivers to work with, and because of that, we don't see the same restrictions. A high percentage of the candidates that apply to our clients' jobs have a CDLA license, which I think is very compelling. So it unfortunately, it just means that companies have to likely outsource to companies that like us, or a similar company that has that data and actual data to use, and makes it a little bit harder for the average recruiter and company or carrier for that matter to do.
Well, Ron, let's see with this. I asked this to everyone that joins, related to nothing we talked about today. What accomplishment are you most proud of in your career, and why?
I think the biggest accomplishment in my life, in my career, is being able to really be here today. I mean, I've been in the space for over 20 years, being able to be what I hope to be, a thought leader in the industry, and really be able to do something that I love and be able to provide to my family in a successful way. That means a lot. I'm a very family oriented. I'm joining you from my house. I don't have to lug into an office each day, and I've been doing that for the last 12 years. So being able to provide for my family, do something I love, and also at the same time have a good work-life balance where I can, visit my kids' sporting events or do things in addition to all that hard work is what I'm very much most proud for.
Well, I appreciate it. Ron, thanks for joining us and giving us some nuggets today on how we can keep those seats filled. And we talked about filling the bucket, but more importantly, we talked about plugging the holes in the leaky bucket.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Actually, I'm going to turn the question back over to you. I don't know if anybody's ever done it before, but what's your most proudest accomplishment today, career-wise?
The fact that this business was two people when we started, and looking around, and you were about to do our Christmas in July, and think about all the families that put food on their table based on the work that we've done over the years. You start to multiply that out, you go, dang, that's a lot of lives that are depending on this business, and that's pretty cool. That gives me goosebumps just saying.
Awesome. Congrats. Yeah, that's a great accomplishment. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we'll leave with this. We're going to leave the survey and a couple details in the show notes for anyone that wants to download them. And Ron Yazzetti, thanks again. Thanks for helping us fill those empty seats and keep them filled.
My pleasure. Again, thanks for having me, Scott.
All right. See you, Ron.